WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. Thank you for tuning to WVTC Radio Detroit and the Community Bell Show with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner, Edna Bell. Stay tuned for insightful information Detroiters will find valuable. Text a friend and tell them to watch with you for news you can use. And now, your host, Edna Bell.
Hello, audience. So glad to have you with us. It's 4:00 on Monday, so it must be the Community Bell Show. We are delighted, as always, to have you with us on Monday. And this is a beautiful Monday. It's warm outside, it's sunny, and we're here. So we couldn't have anything better than that. But the best part about today is we have a special guest, a very special guest. We have with us Senator Adam Ollier. Welcome, Adam.
It's so good to see you. How are you doing?
Oh, absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful. 4:00 on Mondays is Community Bell time, and we are here always to share information with our audience about good things that are going on in Detroit and the vicinity. And so today, one of the best things that we have going on in Detroit is Senator Adam Ollier. And many of you already know he's a senator, represents kind of what I call the east side of the city, kind of middle east, west side of the city. He's kind of and Woodward Avenue, east and west. So whether you are east side or west side, he's your guy. So no argument about that.
I like to joke about how I have one of the most diverse districts in the state, going from Grosse Pointe and Harper Woods through the northeast side of the city of Detroit, through Hamtramck and Highland Park, all the way down into southwest Detroit. So even getting a smidgen of Midtown. So it's an interesting space, and I've had the blessing of getting to know a lot of different folks.
Absolutely. And he's done a great job. Many of you don't know, Adam is a young man who grew up in the city, born in the city, parents live in this city. Father is a retired firefighter. Mother is a retired social worker. Was she with the school system?
No, she
wasn't.
She worked for the state for a little while, and then
Okay.
she worked kind of in a funny way. She worked with Joanne Watson at the YWCA, but my mom got frustrated with being a social worker because so much of the work was about stabilizing somebody for 2 seconds and then pushing them back out in the system, in an underfunded system, and saying, hey, we just can't really help you, but we're going to pretend like we can, and we're going to talk like we can, and then we're going to blame you when it doesn't work out.
Oh, I love it. And it's interesting you mentioned that because my youngest daughter, Sonia, school social worker, left it because she was so frustrated and it was impacting her. It was stressful because she knew that kids needed help, but she didn't have the ability and the funds to do what she knew they needed. So she decided she'd go be an attendance agent, and she's much better and much happier because the stress isn't there the way it was when she was in the social work department. But you're absolutely right. But I tell you, Adam grew up across the street from where I went to high school. Now, everybody probably knows by now that I went to Northern High School, the real big and old, and Woodward and Owen. And so Adam grew up right a few blocks away from there on Atkinson Street. So he really is a Detroiter, probably one of the few real Detroiters in the race for the 13th Congressional District, I want to say. There. So Adam, first of all, talk about your Senate seat and what you're doing and what you've done in your district.
Yeah, so I've been really proud about my time in the legislature because it started very differently than most people. I got elected to a special election, and literally the day I got sworn into office, General Motors announced that they were closing the GM Poletown plant, which at the time was one of the largest employers in my district. And you've been in elected office, and you know what it's like when you have one of those big seminal moments. Most people love to start with the moments where they really know what they were doing and they were all ready for the situation. This was something where I was not prepared for, right? Like I didn't know what I was supposed to do when a plant closes, because plants don't close that frequently. Yeah. And there's usually not much that you can do. But I got a call from the city manager in Hamtramck, and she was like, hey, what are you going to do? And I was like, what am I going to do?
Ask me, what are you going to do?
And so I knew that I did not know what I needed. So I called someone who's always been a mentor to me, former Mayor Archer. And he was like, Adam, you're not going to talk on social media. You're not going to talk to the news. You're going to get to work. And the first thing you need to do is call Carl Levin. And I was like, Senator Levin, I'm going to call Carl Levin. And he's like, just call his office. I mean, you know how Mayor Archer talked. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. Just call his office and they'll get you scheduled. In my mind, I was thinking, yeah, when you call his office, they'll just call and get you scheduled. But, people can't pronounce my name, like nobody knows why, right? And so he's like, don't worry about it. Just, if you're having trouble, tell him I told him to call. So my one staffer calls Senator Levin's law office, and a couple minutes later, I get a text from her saying, Senator Levin is waiting for my call, and she sends me a cell number. And so I'm kind of like fumbling with my phone. It's like, oh, okay. I'm sitting on the Senate floor. It's my first day in, and I'm calling Senator Levin. And he's like, look, you need to get an in-person meeting with the mayor of the city of Detroit, or the mayor's office, the governor's office, MEDC, TED, which is all the alphabet soup of our economic development folks from the city to the state level, the mayor's office in Hamtramck in Detroit, the UAW, General Motors. And he's like, it's got to be in person in the next 24 hours. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I can do that. Sure.
They're going to meet with me, right?
No worries, no problem. But when a U.S. senator tells you you're going to do something, you're going to do, well, at least I always look at it as I'm going to do the thing, right? Like I was like, all right, I've been in this office for less than 24 hours. If he tells me that's what I need to do to keep my plant open, I'm going to do it. And he reiterated to me, don't talk to the news, don't talk on social media, just go do this work. And so I got on the phone and started calling all these folks. And I'm really excited because we're talking on Tuesday. Wednesday, I'm running an in-person meeting, which was the first meeting that General Motors had with government at any level, with the mayor's office, the city manager, the governor's office, the director of TED and MEDC, DUGC, General Motors, and I had spoken to UAW right before. And so those meetings, we met daily till we met weekly, till we met monthly, until they were like, all right, we're going to build an electric Hummer. And I was like, okay, if you're going to lie to me, you could think of a better lie than an electric Hummer. But it was true, right? And so when President Biden was announcing the Build Back Better initiative, I was really grateful for the opportunity, because I was sitting front row center. Because when so many other people were making news and headlines being upset about a potential plant closure, I was in the room doing the work. And through conversations and work with the UAW and General Motors and all the economic development folks, we were able to get something done that not just saved a plant, but made it the foundation for where General Motors is going, right? Factory Zero is the foundation for the electric vehicles that they're going to make. And similarly, as a state senator last year, I was able to support the development of really record-breaking economic development tools to ensure that we continue to build the batteries necessary to make sure that we keep building the electric vehicles. And so I've been really proud of projects like that. But I've gotten a bill signed into law every year that I've served, which only one other Democrat can say is the case. I sit on the Appropriations Committee, where I bring back more money to my district than all but a handful of members, and have been able to get some programs funded that had not been previously, right? So you talk about anywhere you go, you hear and you see Flip the Script alumni, folks who have been involved in that Goodwill Industries program because they had an issue with the criminal justice system. They got in Flip the Script and literally were able to change their lives. When I first got elected, Flip the Script was zeroed out in the state budget. So it had been $1 million appropriation that Detroiters had been fighting for since it first got in, right? And every year it was on the chopping block, and every year you had to fight to keep it in. But this year it was 100% zeroed out, right? And so it wasn't how much was going to be funded like it had been in many years in the past. It was, will this thing make it or not? And so I was really grateful that I was able to get it restored through negotiations and conversations with the governor, as well as with the Republican chair of the subcommittee. And so now, when the new Republican subcommittee chair for the corrections budget announces the highlights of the corrections budget, the first thing he mentioned was the $2.5 million going to Flip the Script, right?
Now,
and so
stop right there. Tell people what Flip the Script is, because some people don't know what that is.
Yeah, so Flip the Script is a program for folks who are either doing jail diversion, right? So some of the courts will say, instead of going to prison or jail, you can go to Flip the Script. And Flip the Script has a rites of passage program. It has reskilling. It helps you get your GED. It has all these programs to literally allow you to change the trajectory of your life. It also does some reentry work. So let's say you had been incarcerated for 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, whatever, that you could go to Flip the Script and get the training that you need to go back out and change your life. They have a number of programs where it could get you started as a welder or doing some other skilled trades or things like that. But the goal is that you go through this program, and when you come out, not only do you have all the skills necessary to get a job, but you have a career, right? And so you are hired in a job with the skills you need and the wraparound services to make sure that you're successful from your paperwork standpoint. So there are a lot of folks who go to prison and don't have a license when they come out, so they can't get a job, or they don't have birth certificates or any of those kind of things. Flip the Script helps you do all those other kind of things. It also
runs the program?
Goodwill.
Goodwill. Okay.
Yep. And so it's right there on the boulevard, just east of I-75. And what's really cool about it is it also gives you a cohort. It gives you a crew of guys who have similar life experience, right? So there's something to be said about somebody who also made a mistake, being able to say, hey man, I know when the streets are calling, right? Like I know that life. And there are 10 other people or 15 or 20 other people in the program who have exactly the same life experience with you. And you are all able to turn it around. And when other things start to come back to you, you have people that you can rely on in this new way that are saying, hey man, we got a good job. Like we can stay in and we can do this. I'll never forget, I had a Republican, a very, very conservative Republican, come down to the city of Detroit to visit Flip the Script with me. And we were sitting there talking to some of the people who had graduated. And one of them, this was the first real job he had ever had. He was a welder. And he was talking to his son about how there was a future that did not involve crime, that like there was a legitimate way to do that. And when he was a kid, he didn't know that that was a possibility because there had never been a man in his family that had a real job, that he clocked into, that he got a W-2 for, that he paid taxes, that he did all those kind of things. And his son was going to grow up in a world where he didn't know anything else except that his dad went to work, had a W-2, could afford to put food on the table, could pay rent, could buy a nice car, and do all those things because of this program. And so when we left that program, Tom, who was the chair of the appropriations subcommittee, we found another $500,000 for it in that first year. So it went from getting zeroed out in the first year to restoring the $1 million to now, almost 4 years later, it being $2.5 million annual appropriation. So not only did we save this program, but we've grown it over time. And those
That's
are the kind
a story to be told. That's the story to be told. It really is, because so often young people don't live on a block where they see men get up and go to work every day. They live on a block where nobody goes to work. And so for this young man to be able to say that to his son, I go to work every day and I can take care of my family, honestly, that's a story.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize that it's the story that we have to tell, because too often these stories are not being told about Black men, right? In this world, in this time, if you're a Black man and you get murdered by the police, everybody knows your name. But if you are a millionaire or billionaire and you are not a professional athlete or entertainer, nobody knows who you are, right? Nobody is talking about those things. And there are two issues in that. It is because people too often, when they make it, don't live in the same community that they were raised in, versus an athlete, right? So athletes, they make it every summer. They have the community cookout. They've got they are doing all those kinds of things. Entertainers are doing those kind of things. But you're just a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, you went to school. Too often, those folks are so disassociated from the communities that they were raised in that it makes such a big difference, right? So, I mean, you talked a little bit about the neighborhood because you knew it well. But my mom grew up in this neighborhood. My mom grew up on Rosedale, not Rosedale Park, but on Rosedale in the North End. And my grandfather had a gas station and a taxi cabs right there at Owen and John R. right there at Northern, by Northern High School. And there are a lot of people of my generation who don't know that Black people used to own gas stations, used to own all of these.
Exactly. Gas stations, party stores, they just don't know. And we have got to tell the story. We've got to put a narrative out there that says, this isn't new for us. We've done this, but we need to get back to doing it. And that's what the real issue is.
To do that, we've got to fund those programs. So I always promised myself I would be the kind of legislator that delivered. I didn't want to be one of those people who came on the show and was like, well, I was fighting for so-and-so, and I was at the protest, and I rallied, and I did so-and-so. Because all of those things are important, right?
The question is, what did you bring home?
Right. I don't have to tell you I was at the rally because you were at the rally. We got photos of us at the rally. The question is, what was the result of the rally? What was the result of the protest? What are the results that have come back from those things? And so when I go to these events and people are talking about the disparity between Black folks' ability to start a business, to run a business, to develop these spaces, every meeting I go into where people are asking me stuff, I'm like, well, what are we doing in our community, right? So Develop Detroit, which is an organization that funds a lot of development spaces here. Every time I meet with them, I'm like, all right, what are we doing for Black developers? What are we doing for Black developers? And so I'm really excited that in this last budget, we got significant funding for Detroit developers that are Black, right?
That's the key.
Not Black and brown, Black.
Black,
Right?
yes.
And because we recognize that is where the real disparity exists. And it's nothing against any other communities or spaces or people, but we have to target the solutions to the problems, right? So when we talk about, access to abortion, we should be talking about ensuring that anyone can get pregnant has access to an abortion, right? As we talk about women's rights, we should not be saying that we need to make sure that men and women are also making the same wage. We should be saying, hey, there is a gender pay gap. We need to level it for women. There is an ethnic pay gap. Also layered onto those kind of things, we have to speak specifically to the problem and to the constituency that is being harmed by these other decisions. And so I've been really grateful for the opportunities to do that as a legislator, and really look forward to, being able to do that at the federal level. So much of this moment has been, there's only so much you can do at the state level, pushing out federal dollars. I want to be a part of changing those systems, changing those guidelines. I was on a forum on Saturday, and a lot of people were talking about homelessness, right? And it's a critically important issue. It's a huge issue, but most people don't understand that the reason it's such a big issue is because, according to the federal definition, there are only 38,000 homeless people in the state of Michigan. And you're like, no, that's not right. There are 38,000 homeless people. And yes, there are 38,000 homeless people, and we all know that is the case. But the technical definition of homeless is that you do not have shelter for 365 days. So let's say you have an aunt, cousin, nephew, brother, friend, church member who is homeless, but they spend the night at your house one day because it is freezing cold. And they report, oh, well, on a day where it was -20, Edna Bell let me spend the night in the garage, or let me stay on the couch, then they don't count. And the reason that that's so important is because that means that at the federal level, they aren't sending the dollars necessary to address this problem. So we are funding a problem for 38,000 people that is probably more like a 300 or a million people, right?
Yes.
And those are the kind of challenges that we have to address, right? Like we look out into this space and say, well, what are we going to do in communities? What are we going to do for people? We have to see people where they are. A lot of people want to say, well, the reason that so-and-so is homeless or isn't working is because they have done something wrong. And that's just not right. Our systems are broken. Our systems are broken. And honestly, anybody with any sense would say, but by the grace of God go I, because, we were talking a little bit about your old commission district on Sunday when we were going to and fro from church.
Yes, from churches.
But my best friend grew up in your district right over by Cody on Artesian. And I remember running from people who were shooting, right? Like I remember those kind of things because that's what it was like for him to grow up in that thing. He was just as smart, if not smarter than me, way more charismatic. But when it was time, we went to school together from kindergarten through 12th grade. He went to the University of Michigan. I went to Cornell. He took a semester off to take care of his father, who was having health issues. But the summer after I graduated, he had a semester left. He was getting a bachelor's in architecture from the University of Michigan, something that is exceedingly difficult, right? Way more difficult than my undergrad degree was in, right? But he got picked up for attempted murder walking down the street. The police accused him of walking down the street, mind you, while he's on the phone with his girlfriend who lives in Florida. So same thing like he does every night. He's on the phone with her, and they said that he shot some teenagers, right? So he's 22. They accused him of murdering some 15, 16-year-old kid who he had never met, who no one could make anything. And the eyewitness said that they had seen him twice, maybe walking down the street, said that she could clearly identify him from at like 2 a.m. based on the mobile flares while he's wearing a hoodie, like 40 feet away from him across the street. And she is standing next to the person who is murdered, right? And so as this person is getting shot, she can clearly see the shooter and identify that as my friend who she's seen twice ever. It's like, I don't know what kind of world you live in where you think that you can see anyone based on muzzle flares. Like you can't. Yeah. And even more.
And that you have enough wherewithal and you're calm enough to even be able to recognize anybody or anything.
And so he's at home on the phone with his girlfriend. His mother is at home asleep in the home with him, right? And he gets picked up a little after July 4th. He doesn't come home from jail until a little after October.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's those moments where only because he was at the University of Michigan, only because all his close friends were college students, only because he had no criminal record or record in general, only because he had good grades, was he able to win this case because they had 2 eyewitnesses that were saying it was him and were like, hey, man, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. You need to take a plea deal. You need to take a plea deal. And so I am always incredibly grateful that his judge was Judge Vera Massey Jones, because she was like, this just don't make sense. And so he's about your complexion. No, he's a little bit darker than you. And the eyewitness was like, yeah, he was a brown skinned dude. And she was like, he's dark skinned. And it's like these kind of moments where it's like, all right, you think you can identify him from 40 feet away in this situation that no one could identify him. And my friend almost lost everything. And it took years for him to come back from those moments.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we see day in and day out people who are convicted on far less. And those are the kind of problems that I've been really grateful for the opportunity to work on. I sit on the appropriations committee that helps fund the state appellate defender's office so that we are making sure that not only are people not wrongly incarcerated, but that they're not overcharged, something we know happens to our people all the time.
Absolutely.
And even more than that, that when there are not people that look like us on the jury, particularly for a young Black man, when there is another Black man on the jury, the incidence of conviction for a Black man goes down by almost 70%, right? So we're talking about a huge difference. And so I've been working over the last year and a half with the Chief Justice from the Michigan Supreme Court and the state court administrator and the prosecutor, Kim Worthy, and a number of other prosecutors and folks across the state, and Judge Kinney from the Wayne County Circuit, to develop some real reforms to jury trials to ensure that not just our Black people included and that we fix the pool, but that we are making sure that our jury trials are more fair for people, allowing people who were formerly incarcerated to serve on juries, right? Because right now you can't in Michigan.
I know.
And it's like you take this whole population that have been incarcerated and you take them out of the system, that just doesn't work for me. And so we're really excited. We're going to roll those things out soon. And I'm really grateful for all the folks who have partnered. But I have made my priority as a legislator about doing the things that are hard, that make an impact in the community that I'm from, because if not for me, who, right? Like when we talk about Patrick Lyoya and that murder, and
yes,
there's no question that's what happened. People would say it was a routine traffic stop. Well, there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop when you are a young Black man.
Especially when you're Black, no. It's interesting. The Wayne County Sheriff's Office has put together a program that helps young Black men know how to respond when they're at a traffic stop. And I think that's a great program because they take them through and tell them how to respond, what to do. And it's sad that we have to do that. But we have to do that for them and for the sheriffs, because the sheriffs need it just as bad as the young people need it.
I mean, my dad, my parents, we had those kind of conversations. And, there are only two Black men in the state Senate today, myself and Marshall Bullock. When this thing first happened, the two of us were recounting the moments of us getting pulled over and how we respond when we're pulled over. Marshall's like, man, we roll down all the windows. We put our hands outside. I put my license on the dashboard so you can see it. So, you know that there's nothing in there with me, right? Like, and our white colleagues are like, you do what?
They don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. And I'm doing that with my grandson right now. His father and his uncle and his grandfather are doing that he's 16, about to get his driver's license. I'm scared to death. But they are taking him through the things that you're supposed to do and not do right now. That should not be, because white kids don't have to go through that. No. They don't have to learn that behavior.
And so that's one of the reasons that I was such a big supporter of auto insurance reform. Does it have problems? Yes. But does every legislation have problems? Absolutely. But almost 200,000 more people in Michigan have auto insurance that haven't had it for more than 3 years. Those are primarily people that look like us that weren't getting it because it was too costly. And what I will never forget is that Patrick Lyoya is dead because his license plate didn't match the vehicle. And we know disproportionately that those are the things that happen when you don't have valid tags. And when you don't have valid tags, it's usually because auto insurance is too expensive. Because registering your vehicle is only like $100. That's not typically the problem. The problem is you have to have valid auto insurance to get your tags registered or renewed. And so it's recognizing that there are all these touch points that we have got to address that only happen when we recognize where we come from and that we go back to those same spaces, right? Like I live 2 blocks from my parents. I live in the neighborhood that I was raised in, and that's where I'm raising my kids, right? Like we bought the ugly house on our block. And I mean, people don't think about that today. But 12 years ago in 2009 and 2010, when we were trying to buy the space, I mean, we didn't have doorknobs in the house. And I mean, not a doorknob, not one single doorknob. No light fixtures. The copper pipe was all taken. And while we were buying the house, I literally had to walk squatters out myself, right? Like,
wow.
That's the kind of house that we did in the space. And everyone was like, why would you buy a house in the city? It's like, because this is where I'm from. Because the last thing that I'm ever going to let somebody say is, well, what you going to do in my mama's neighborhood, my grandma's neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
I live in my mama's neighborhood. I live in the neighborhood that my mama was raised in. And my grandmother, who is 99 years old.
I was going to ask you to talk about your grandmother. Talk about your heritage to let people know about that side of it. Because they don't know.
So my grandmother is really the only living, the only one of my grandparents that I ever really had a relationship. Her husband and her husband got divorced right after my dad was born, and so he was born in LA, and they moved back to Oklahoma, and so he spent the first couple years of his life in Oklahoma. But her older brother, Chester Arthur Adams, who I was named after, had a good job working at Ford, and so they moved up from Oklahoma to Detroit, because my great uncle had a good job at Ford. And when I talk about how old my grandmother is, my grandmother's 99 years old. She was born 18 months after the Tulsa massacre, less than 40 miles from it. So Tulsa was the big city, right? And her brothers were around and understood what this space happened. And as we talk about kind of ethnicity and like where we come from, my grandmother had two older brothers. Her oldest brother, on his birth certificate, it said white. Her middle brother, it said colored. And on hers, it said Indian. They had the same parents, but the doctor looked at him and was like, white, colored, Indian.
Wow.
Those are the kind of things that happened in those days that we recognize. And so my grandmother, and I are enrolled member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. My grandmother's grandmother walked from Alabama to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears. And so as we talk,
go back, Muskogee Creek.
Muskogee Creek. And so we're originally in Georgia and Alabama. And so my grandmother's grandmother walked from Alabama to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears.
The Trail of Tears. Wow.
And she had to do that because her father was murdered because of through that process. Yeah. And so it was, it's an interesting moment that we find ourselves in right here, and why I've been able to work on the kind of legislation that I have. I introduced the legislation to replace the statue of Lewis Cass at the National Statuary Hall with Mayor Coleman Young. And I'm really grateful that it was able to pass out of the state Senate. But Lewis Cass was a believer of popular sovereignty, which sounds like a great thing, right? Like who doesn't like sovereignty? But what it really meant was the expansion of slavery.
Yes.
Right. And that is the thing that people have got to recognize. He was a proponent of expanded slavery. He ran the, President Jackson's, program of Indian removal, which we know is the Trail of Tears. And so I'm really excited about being able to replace that with Coleman Young, who was unapologetically Black, who was a champion, who was a Tuskegee Airman, who was able to do all those kind of things that were meaningful in this space. And so my family came to Detroit like most people's, right? So my grandmother came up working at Ford. My mother's side of the family came from Mississippi, from Mount Olive out near Jackson. And my grandfather was an entrepreneur, right? So he had taxi cabs and had a gas station here in the north, living on the north end and all those kind of things. And so, but he died when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And so I didn't really get a chance to know him. So, but, I hear all the stories of, the Thigpens, and people are like, oh, you a Thigpen? I'm like, yeah, those are my people, right? And so like, oh man, I know those kind of things. And so that's what it means to have roots in a community and to be a part of it and to understand those spaces and what that means. So I'm super grateful for that opportunity. This is actually the first election my grandmother will ever be able to vote for me. And that's super meaningful for me because she was born in the US, but not born as citizens, because Indians weren't made citizens until she was 1.5 years old. And so Indians literally earned citizenship by being the highest per capita participants in World War I. And it still continues to be the case. And so as a captain in the Army and stuff like that, I am really grateful for the opportunity to kind of continue that tradition and engage in those spaces. But
That's incredible. Now, I want you to talk about your background and your schooling, and all of those things that people don't know.
yeah, so I literally went to school in the North End, right? So I went to Flicks, which was right here on 75 and Kniff. I went
Mhm.
to Flicks, Halley, and Renaissance. And so people always joke about how people tease me about how I'm not from anywhere, right? So West Siders are like, "You're not from the East," they're like, "You from the East Side," and East Siders are like, "Yeah, you from the West Side." And if I'm like, "Well, I live in the North End," they're like, "You don't really live on the North End. You from?" And so, it's like I went to elementary school on the East Side. I went to middle and high school on the West Side. I lived the first 21 years of my life 6 houses west. I have lived the last 12 1 house east. So I've lived in the same 2 blocks, but it's like I live in the Bermuda Triangle as far as people are concerned. But I went to Cornell on a scholarship. I played football. I ran track. I was a decathlete. I was a volunteer firefighter in college. I have a master's from the University of Michigan in urban planning. And ever since that, those 5 or 6 years of school are the only time that I was away from my neighborhood. My wife and I
emphasize that he is both Black and Indian, real Indian. Now, a lot of folks run around talking, yeah, I got Indian in my background. Yeah, I got some Indian. Everybody doesn't have Indian. so he real Indian.
And so I vote in my nation's elections, have been involved. The tribal governments have been very supportive of my congressional races here. It's been really cool. I'd be only the 5th currently serving Native American member of Congress, and I'd be the first Black and Native American person since Reconstruction. And so I'm really excited about that because the first Black people who were elected to Congress were also Native American. And vice versa, and I think those are the kind of things that are important for us to recognize is that Black people are a diverse people. That doesn't take away from your Blackness, right? Like there's 100% no question that with one drop of people who were the descendants of slaves, you're Black. I'm Black. I'm raising Black kids. I'm married to a Black woman. I have 2 Black little kids. And I'm super grateful because when I get
it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing.
Police or go into a store, they don't see anything but a Black man.
That's
right.
And
not only do I know
talk about your district.
Yeah. So the
13th congressional district that you are going to be the next representative of.
From your lips to God's ears. So the 13th congressional district includes 100% of my current state Senate district. So I currently represent 9 of the 20 communities. It goes from Grosse Pointe on the eastern edge all the way to midway between Wyoming and Livernois on Woodmere. So it's literally the midpoint between Wyoming and Livernois, and it goes down into Southwest Detroit. It includes River Rouge, Ecorse, Romulus, Taylor, Lincoln Park, Allen Park, Melvindale, Southgate, Wyandotte, River Rouge, Taylor, Wayne, and a little bit of Dearborn Heights. And so this is a big and very diverse community. You're talking about going from Grosse Pointe to Metro Airport and staying in a district. You're talking about skirting the entirety of that space and going along the waterfront and then skipping off the waterfront. You're talking about a district that for many years have been represented by John Dingell and then Debbie Dingell. That is almost equal parts Debbie Dingell, Rashida Tlaib, and Brenda Lawrence. And so each one of them had about a third of the current or of the new 13th congressional district. And I represent a third of the new 13th congressional district in the Senate today. So I have just about as much ground as any of the 3 currently serving members of Congress that represent a portion of what will be the new 13th congressional district. And so
any of you listening out there and watching, if you live in any of those places, any one of those spots, Adam Ollier is your new U.S. Congressperson because you're going to vote for it.
I like to hear that. I love to hear that. Speaking it into existence. And it's really been a pleasure, right? So you and I got the opportunity to go to a couple of churches on Sunday. Heart, where my parents are members. We went to Plymouth United Church of Christ, where my wife and I are members. And then I got to go to Greater Grace, where Bishop Ellis was, grateful to have us. And he got to tell the story about how important it is to continue to have Black representation in Congress. This is likely going to be the only Black member of Congress. And Bishop Ellis told the story of how him and Warren Evans and yourself and a number of folks got together to ensure that a Black member of Congress continues to represent the state like it's happened since the 50s. And so I was really grateful that he was able to talk, and really, humbled to be chosen by that group, because it really matters. And, we see that the second quarter campaign finance reports just came out, and I raised over $900,000.
You worked real hard. You really, when I saw those numbers, I said, wow, he's been on the phone nonstop.
Yes, I've done more than 750 hours of call time, which is the equivalent of almost 32 days. And that's what it takes to win when you're running against someone who announced that they were going to give themselves $5 million, but at this point has given themselves $8 million and already spent $5.8 million, right? So this will be the most expensive primary in the state, one of the most expensive primaries in the country, and certainly, one of the most expensive Black races, particularly for an open seat ever.
Ever. Absolutely. Absolutely. So listeners, you need to make sure that you know that we have somebody Black running for this seat. Don't believe the hype. There are lots of commercials out there that you're looking at, I'm sure. Don't believe the hype. Believe what you see and hear from someone who grew up in this district, who has lived in this district all his life, who has a wife and two wonderful little kids, a little Lily, and the little boy is just precious. And so his father is a retired firefighter. His mother is a retired social worker. And they still volunteer. They still work in the community. A member of Plymouth Congregational Church. His parents are a member of, Blessed Sacrament, dear Father Thomas. Everybody knows Father Thomas. But the important part is, it's important that we have somebody that looks like us represent this district. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that all of you know, and I know you out there listening and watching, I know who you are, because you're always calling in. Regina Gabriel Smith just called in and said, I didn't know this young man, but I know him now. And she's glad that she was introduced to him. And Regina calls in on a regular basis. Thank you, Regina. And pass the word. Pass the word. It's important that we recognize that we have someone who's going to look out for the least of these.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I recognize the blessing that I have. And I think that's the thing that I was telling you about my friend growing up. I know that I'm no better than he is. I just got much luckier. And the responsibility that I have is recognizing that there are a lot of people who haven't gotten the kind of opportunities that I've gotten. Right? Like I'm certainly a believer that God has a plan for me, but I also have to do my part. And so every day I have to wake up and decide that I'm going to do everything I can to sow into God's plan, or I'm not. And so I get up from the moment I wake up to the moment I say my prayers at night to do exactly that, because I know that I have been put in these positions with a responsibility and an obligation to do as much as I can to take care of folks. My
Absolutely. Dad. And you got three, I'm giving you three more people, my three grandbabies, 2 boys, 2 girls. So just know that you got two boys, 15 and 16. Grandbaby will be 14 in a couple of months. So yeah, you got some folks to look after.
My dad, when he sat me down and told me I couldn't be a firefighter, he challenged me to try to save more than just one person at a time. And that's how I got into this space, was because we knew that, people wanted to make decisions to save money, not lives. Mm-hmm. And talking to my mom around the table, we didn't talk about politics like, this person or that person. We talked about the impact of decisions. My mom often told this story about how once in your lifetime, when you're on benefits, you can get a clothing allowance for clothes for your mother or, for your parents' funeral, right? So you only have one mother, right? You can't use it 2 times. You can't use it 3 times. You get it 1 time. And her supervisor was giving her grief about giving this woman her allowance. And the lady was like, well, did you get the copy of the death certificate and all this kind of stuff? It's like, lady, she gets it 1 time. If she's lying about it right now, she won't be able to claim it later. But for anybody who's ever had to bury someone they love, a lot of those things can take time. You might not have them the day you put someone in the ground. And it's just a stressful thing for no reason. My mom quit right after that, right? And it's like, those are the kind of things where you get somebody with a little bit of power that is saying, well, I need that other document. For what? It's not required. You just want to see it. Like, it's a benefit you get 1 time.
And the interesting part is they don't require that document of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. They just want it. They want it for when they want it, because they think that so-and-so is scheming.
Exactly.
and they look at us like we're scheming. And so it's been my job and my responsibility to make sure that there are just less opportunities for people to do our people wrong. And that means changing systems from a systemic standpoint. It means working with people who are in power. So I serve in the state Senate, and the state Senate has been in Republican control every day that I've been alive. I'm 36, yes. Been in Republican control since I was 38. People often say to me, well, Adam, you are always working with Republicans. Well, they're in charge.
Who are you going to work with?
Who
are you going to work with?
It's easy to cut somebody out. It's easy to do those kind of things. I don't get paid for that. Like, that's not what I go to work to do. I go to work to deliver. And people
find a way to do it. However, whatever that is, you've got to find a way to bring home the bacon, as they say. And that's what you've done. And we are proud that you have done that. That's just to be so honored that you've done that. Now, we are about to leave the show right now. But before we leave, I want to, again, congratulate WVTC Radio Detroit for winning the Stellar Award as the #1 internet radio station in the country. Stellar Awards were given out in Atlanta this weekend, and Miss Sandy Rose, who is the owner and creator of this station, was there and was beside herself when they called our name. So we are excited that we won. It's a wonderful thing. You'll hear more about the Stellar Awards and our wonderful trophy and award that we won, but we're just pleased. Adam, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. A listening audience, I know you're out there. Remember what you've heard. Act accordingly. Thank you so much. You're welcome. And we'll see you next Monday, 4:00, the Community Bell Show. Be there, or as they used to say, be square. I guess they don't say that anymore. I think my grandchildren would probably say, Nana, we don't say that anymore. But just be there at 4:00 next Monday for the Community Bell Show. We are so pleased to have had you. Listening audience, thank you for having us. And thank you for helping us win the Stellar Award, because we know it was voted on nationally. So we're just glad you voted for us. We think we do a good job, and we're just pleased to be able to talk to you every week. Sandy Rose, thank you, my dear. You're wonderful. We're excited. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Community Bell with your host, former Wayne County Commissioner, Edna Bell. This broadcast was brought to you by WVTC Radio Detroit. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.wvtcradio.com, or download our WVTC app from the Play Store for Android users and the App Store for iPhone users. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, tell a friend to tune in. We'll see you next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern to the Community Bell Show, right here on WVTC Radio Detroit. You're listening to WVTC Gospel Radio Detroit,